Hello everybody, welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia and today it is time for Friday Reads. I think this is the last Friday Reads of August. Let me check. Nope, I'm wrong. Next week will be the last Friday in August. So we have another good solid full week of August left and we are deep into the salad days of summer. Those are the days. It has a different meaning than you might think for those, well, actually both, because if you looked at grocery prices lately, but it's just the days where we just do not feel like cooking hot foods. And we eat a lot of salads and cold sandwiches this year more than ever. It's been in the mid-90s. I know I start talking about the weather every time, but it has been in the mid-90s. It's been weeks and weeks of a solid block. I think there was this one day that it rained in July where it was in the upper 80s part of the day. It's just a dome of hot, humid weather. So enough of my old lady prattling about weather. What has been going on? Well, not a lot. A lot of hibernating and reading and doing excursions to indoor places. And I think I said the exact same thing last week. Let's move on to other topics. In bookish news, I guess the big bookish news event was that the Polari Prize finished completely imploding itself because of its poor choices. If you have not been following that, there are several really good videos specifically about what happened with the Polari Prize, which is a UK literary prize for LGBTQ+ authors. And they have a debut author list and a more established author list. And they came out with their long list, and they long listed John Boyne, very outspoken transphobe, and people were not happy about this, obviously, for good reasons. And eventually about 2/3 of the authors withdrew their books from consideration, and 2 of the judges left as well. And it just snowballed, and they made very inadequate statements about it. Just the tone deafness all the way across the board was just really, really bad. And eventually they just pulled the whole thing. So it's really a shame for the authors. Imagine the excitement of having your book, especially the debut authors, and having your book named to a literary prize long list, and then this terrible cascade of events. It was a sad state of affairs, and but that's what happened. So in television, the only thing we've been watching the past several days is season 2 of Blue Lights, the Irish police procedural type show about a group of police officers in a neighborhood in Belfast and the different stuff that's going on. The part that's good is the characters of the police officers and their different interrelations and some of the things that go on in the neighborhood, but it has this also real tropey drug dealer thing, who somebody went to jail and now who's going to be the new kingpin kind of posturing sort of thing. And those characters, we were talking about it, and as far as I can figure out or recall, the only show that ever managed to avoid just being really tropey about that kind of dynamics was The Wire. That's enough of my television criticism. Let's move on to books. So I did finish 3 books this week while I was hiding out from climate change. The first one was H is for Hawk by Helen Macdonald. I've been talking about this one for a few weeks and I did finish. It's a grief memoir. Macdonald was very close to their father and he suddenly passed, and in the midst of the grief, they decide to adopt and raise and train a goshawk. Now, I mentioned when I first started reading this book that I thought, because it said adopting a hawk on the back, that it was like a rescue situation, but actually Macdonald is a falconer, and I learned all this stuff about falconry, and I learned about Macdonald's childhood obsession with it and how they learned all about falconry. And then there's also a parallel not narrative, but a parallel examination in this book of T.H. White's experience also raising a hawk and his life in general as a closeted man. And so there's these parallel journeys about raising the hawk. an inexperienced person working in the dark and also kind of working in the dark with their own identity. And then we have Helen, who is experienced, but still, this is an unknown territory. They've never tried to train a goshawk before, and they are going through this journey of grief as well. There's a couple points in this book where you really worry about Helen and her state of mind, and she's so candid about the uneven path of grief, and then eventually improving and seeking help. And there was some things that were hard to read about, just the brutal carnivorous nature of hawks. They have to take the hawk out to hunt for food, and it's gross and everything, but I wouldn't say it's gratuitous. It's just the nature of this beast. And Mabel's just a magnificent bird. It becomes a character of her own in the story, and the nature writing is good, and just the way that the two of them bond to get to know each other. And Helen can read Mabel's expressions and body language and knows what kind of mood she's in or what she's going to do, and so that's really cool. So this was good. This was a gift from my friend Michael. Thanks again, Michael, because I really enjoyed this. Then I read something very uncomfortable, but an excellent book, and I read it for my band book club at the local library, and that is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. Now, several of you tossed out reassurance last week when I said I was getting ready to read this, and also when I put it in my TBR, and I thank you for that, but it was pretty tough. It was emotionally a very heavy book, and also there were some instances of brutality that were actually very difficult to read. But what do you expect? It's a book about Vietnam. So Tim O'Brien has written a novel. It's a fictional novel, but there's a metafictional element at play, and the structure is really incredible in this book, because it's kind of autobiographical, and he is actually in the story, but some aspects of that story shift around, and time shifts and things like that, and I'm not explaining this very well. So let's roll back. The book opens in a very powerful way with a description of a group of very young men, 18 to 22 years old. It's Vietnam, and describing the things that they actually physically were carrying. The gear, the weaponry, the supplies, the uniforms, and then their personal items. So almost like a laundry list of the things they actually carried. And then as you go into the book, it's really about all of the things that they carried that you cannot see and that they can never put down. We are transported back and forth in time. Sometimes it is these scenes of what happened with this group during the war, and then the ones who survived, we get glimpses of their life afterward, including mainly Tim O'Brien. But even with that, it's still fictional. Even the stories that he tells, sometimes he backs up and he tells it a different way. Maybe it was like this, maybe it was like that. It's not documentation, it's memory and emotion and reflection. It doesn't shy away from the atrocity of the situation of this group of boys, really, who don't really know what they're doing or why they're doing it, but they are trying to get through it. And then just some of the atrocious things they actually did, some of it in a very dark humor kind of way, some of it just like what happens to your mind when you're in this situation, what kind of things might you do. And then if you survive and you go back to your previous life, there's been a lot written about that, about the difficulty of reintegrating into society where things are going on normally. And it comes into this book a lot too, because they receive letters, and there's just this otherworldly quality to these letters where their relatives or girlfriends are describing ordinary events, things that they went and did, stuff going on around town, and they're just out sitting in a swamp, in a jungle, trying not to step on landmines. And it's just really, I can see why this would be a really powerful book to read in senior high school, because that's where it tends to get banned. It's in high school curriculums and then sometimes gets challenged or banned. Now, interestingly, it wasn't challenged or banned for the darkness of the content or the emotional weight of the content. It was for things like there's profanity or there's sexual references. Well, what do you think a group of 18 to 22-year-old guys, how do you think their language and their references are going to be? I mean, how realistic would it be if none of that was in the book? And we had some interesting discussions about the reality of combat and war and being in the military versus the version of it that gets presented by high school recruiters. Then, now, and forever, really, and some experiences and things that we have witnessed in different contexts, in different types of high schools. So it was a really good discussion. I think everybody there agreed that it was a difficult, uncomfortable read, but just beautifully written. I thank the banned book club because I don't think I ever would have picked this up and read it, just because I don't really like to read war stories for the very reasons that I discussed, but I'm glad I did. It really did live up to the hype. So I was glad. And now I've read 2 war books this year. I think I'm done for a while. I've done my time stepping out of my comfort zone, and both the books were really good and worthwhile though, so I don't regret it. Now, do I regret the next book? No, I don't, because it was a good buddy reading experience with my friend Louise, but the book did not fully live up to our expectations. And that book was The Wall by Marlen Haushofer and translated by Shaun Whiteside from German. And this book was written in the 1960s, but it wasn't translated until 1990. And it has a really interesting premise, and it has some strengths that I'm going to get into in a second, but we both agreed in the final analysis that the book is too long. And it's not a long book. It's only about 230 pages, but it should have been a shorty. I'll get into it. So first of all, I still love this cover. Although this is the wrong kind of cow. It was not a black and white dairy type cow. It was a brown cow, but I quibble. So this is a book about an unnamed protagonist who is at a hunting lodge in the Alps. Her cousin's hunting lodge, her cousin and her husband have a hunting lodge. She's there for the weekend. And while she's there alone, because they were in town, she gets up one morning and a big invisible wall has divided her from the rest of the world. And it appears that everything on the other side of the wall is dead. And there is just her. And eventually she realizes it's she, the dog that already lived there at the lodge, and there's a cow and a cat. So just this woman and a few animals, and she quickly finds purpose in keeping the animals safe and alive while she tries to figure out what's going on. And she does investigate the wall, but she pretty much quickly settles into the business of survival. Now, this is hailed as a feminist classic, and we talked about that. There's an article I still have yet to read that Louise sent to me just this morning, but we talked about that and kind of wondered, why is it a feminist classic in particular? And we think part of it has to do with when it was written, and just that some of this narrator who chooses not to give us her name, but she's writing a document in case anybody ever finds it. That's what we're reading. She's a woman in her, we eventually learn she's a woman in her 40s who is divorced and has 2 daughters that are almost grown. And she occasionally thinks of these daughters, but she doesn't spend a lot of time grieving. She knows that they're probably dead and she doesn't think about it. She avoids thinking about it too much, but she's not consumed with loss and devastation, which is one interesting factor about her. She realizes that the animals are going to rely on her for shelter and care and sustenance, and so she kind of focuses on that and goes into a survival mode. And she's a pretty resourceful person. And eventually, through her time, she comes to realize that this is the place that she belongs. And I guess that's a radical thought, especially in 1963, that she would rather be here alone and feel this sense of purpose than resume the life she was living before. She has made peace with foregoing any other human contact, and she prefers the company of these animals and her solitary life. She never really expresses loneliness particularly or yearns for human companionship. The problem with the book, as far as not loving it, is the pacing and plot development. It goes excruciatingly slowly. At the beginning, it's so interesting. Like, what is this? An invisible wall, and she's trying to figure out how far it goes, and then she finds the cow, and she's gathering and making a place for it in the barn and all of this. And then it just kind of goes on and on and on and on with a very quotidian description of her daily tasks. And I guess that maybe part of that we talked about is that the author, Haushofer, wanted you to feel the weight of those tasks, that the exhaustion that she felt every day for spending hours cleaning and gathering and gardening and harvesting potatoes and trying to cook something in a rustic manner and all of this. And she describes how tired she is at the end of the day. But it's so minute in the detail. Every time she travels up to this summer cottage and then she travels back, we get all the details of everything along the way. And it's not scintillating nature writing either. It's just kind of boring. There's long, boring parts where nothing happens. The only tension that's created is that right from the start, and this is not a spoiler because she mentions this almost right away, she is telling you, she's writing this document, she's describing what happened from the beginning, but she alludes to the fact that the dog will die. Because she'll say, well, now that Lynx is gone, now that Lynx is dead. So all through the book, you're waiting to find out, well, what happened to the dog? And so that's the only narrative tension. It's just this endless kind of survival document. So there's a huge piece, 3/4 of the book, that is very, very slow. And it became difficult in the middle there to find a whole lot to talk about. But then every now and then there would be a page or a paragraph where she would get into some interesting reflections and you go, oh, well, this part's pretty good. But overall, so in terms of star ratings, which I don't really apply, but I said, well, I'll give it a 3. Louise said I think she said she'd go with a 2.5. So we liked the experience of reading it together, and we liked certain aspects in the premise, but overall we did not love this book. And I think we both read The Blue Book of Nebo by Manon Stephen Ross, which is a Welsh novel. And I kept thinking of that book, and that book is better, tighter, more interesting. Also about a woman. In this case, she also has a son who similarly has to survive after an apocalyptic event. And I just found her to be a more interesting character, and her chronicle of doing a lot of these same things was much more compelling. So that's my recommendation. I don't recommend against this book, but be ready for it's not a post-apocalyptic thrill ride of any sorts. It's very slow. I recommend The Blue Book of Nebo instead. So that brings me to currently reading. Well, in the T.S. Eliot group, we are going to be rounding out the month with a reading of the 4 quartets. And I'm excited about this because I've never read the 4 quartets. And we're also going to read selections from Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, which I have read before. And I've talked about I used to have it, and then I had a dog that ate it. But I got one from the library. And I got the 4 quartets for 99 cents on Apple Books, in case you're interested. And so I started reading those last night, but it was right before bed, so I need to go back and read them again. But I really I want to get a sense of the language, and I was really loving what I was reading. I was reading Burnt Norton, the first part, and interesting right away. I need to go back and read it again and post some comments in the group. And this has been a very interesting journey. And I kind of did fizzle out towards the end of The Wasteland. I was hanging in there, and then this past week I just got really caught up in reading other things, and I didn't contribute as much. So I'm going to try to finish strong and participate better with the 4 quartets. I also started reading The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. LeGuin. Ooh, it matches me. This is the second book in the science fiction double feature selections this month on my Discord. I was trying to figure out if it was a reread, but nothing is ringing any kind of bell. I thought that maybe I had read it when I was a teenager. And maybe I did, but I don't remember, so it doesn't matter. So it counts as a new read because the only thing I know is what I know from common knowledge. And so where am I? I'm on page 80. It is a story about an Earth man named Ginley? Wait, what was his name? Ginry I, who is an envoy representing a kind of a confederation of planets. And he has gone to this planet, Gethin, I think it's called, to try to convince them to join this federation and to explain to them the benefits of joining. And he has been preceded by some investigators who went without identifying themselves just to kind of check out the planet. And what we're reading is interspersed documents, some of his narration, other official documents and observations that have been filed, and then there's another narrator who is a resident or a dweller of this planet named Estevan, who at the beginning of the book is thrown out of his kingdom. I'm using his lightly here. I'll get to that in a minute. And he's been exiled. People on this planet are, I don't know what the right word would it be, not really gender neutral. Well, most of the time they're gender neutral or agendered or just non-gendered. And once a month there's a time where it's called Kimmer, where they become sexually viable and they may find a partner, and at that time they become either male or female temporarily and then go back into the agendered status the rest of the time. And any person any month might be male or female. Everyone has the capacity for both. So the same person might be a mother and a father. So this is a kind of a mind blower for the Terrans who have come to investigate this planet. They're kind of hung up on this. And in return, the Gethinians are kind of uncomfortable by the fact that Genry is clearly male all the time, even though he tries to downplay it with clothing, but it just, they can feel the vibe. They just think that's kind of distasteful. That's the setup. But I think the book is not really about that, although there is the aspect of two cultures not understanding each other, and are they going to reach an understanding or an appreciation, or are they going to be hung up on the barrier of the differences? I think that's important. And then there's a bunch of political stuff going on amongst the different parts of this planet, which I think is more what the plot is about than what the people are like. But this is part of the world building, and the first part of the story is explaining all this. Although she does a really interesting thing narratively. You get little hints about the gender and sexuality of the people, and then there's this whole chapter about it that's somebody's observations that had come in earlier, but they're very, very biased and negative about it and thinking that it's just weird. And so as a reader, you get to step out and look at, well, here's the facts, but there's this overlay of misunderstanding or distrust of the facts, and so that's pretty interesting to me. That's what I'm reading right now. Haven't gotten too far. Trying to get a hang of the conflicts and the political aspects going on with the regions in this story. All right, and so this weekend I have another book coming up. It's supposed to start today, actually. And I'm so excited because Pat and I have been trying to buddy read one book and then another for a while. And we finally had chosen a book, and then it was a couple months ago, and then we picked September. And so we're actually ready to start now. And we're going to read The Book of Records by Madeleine Thien. and I bought this a while back. We both have been really psyched to read this book. I know a lot of people thought it was going to be on the Booker list, and it wasn't, but it's still on our list, and so we're going to start reading that today, and I will report back on how that is going. But I am really, it's just been buzzing on my cart, ready to go. So moving into the last week of the month, I do still need to read another reread. If I'm going to stay on my little schedule of reading my whole 60 before 60 thing. If I reread Eastbound, and my pace is that if I read 2 a month, reread, then I will get to the end on time. And if I get off the pace, then I have to read extra in some other month. So I have plenty to choose from my reread master list. So I should pick something up and do that. But I'm also kind of dying to read this, which is part of my Women in Translation selections on the calculation of volume number 1. I have number 2 waiting over there too. They also make excellent shorty Septembers. So if I don't quite make it. And so, I mean, what are the odds that I'm going to read the Book of Records and some reread and this in the next week and finish The Left Hand of Darkness? The odds are 50-50. I'm going to say I'll manage to hit 3 out of 4. So we'll just see what happens. Okay, I think that's it. I think that's enough. You're probably not even here anymore. So I hope that you have a great weekend. Let me know what you have been reading. I have got some books in the mail. So I think in this upcoming week, I know there's going to be a September TBR preview. It's a little ambitious. I know you're shocked to hear that. You'd think I'm just sitting here just pining away trying to figure out what on earth I might read. No, I have a big stack. And so there might be a little book haul too, because there's been some minor acts of book purchasing. So all that's coming up. Tell me what's going on with you. Have a good time. Have a good weekend. Happy reading. Talk to you soon.